G'day ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to MagzTV. So I'm going to try and slow this one down a little bit. I'm trying to cut back on my Red Bull and my coffee, at least for the odd video here and there. Anyways, today we'll be taking a look at WINWING's takeoff and combat ready panels. So for absolute clarity, yes, these along with a second package that I'll be showing later in the week were sent to me for free for review purposes. No, WINWING has no influence on what I will say here and is basically rolling the dice that I won't crap all over their products. So with that clarity out of the way, what we have here is a pair of cockpit button boxes designed to replicate some of the more important controls in the A-18C Hornet as seen in DCS, although the switches can be bound to anything. It's important to note that this is not a set of recreation panels, so for those looking to build an accurate Hornet replica cockpit, you'll need to look elsewhere. This is technically two separate products, although it becomes clear with use that they are intended to be brought and work together, but we'll get to that later in the review. WINWING isn't too fancy with the names here. The combat ready panel is what it says on the box, a panel that will let you shortcut to a number of key systems that you'll be needing in combat. Alright, so let's go for a little bit of a walk around the panel. So we'll start off with the combat ready panel, which is the one at the top here. Top left hand corner we have the jettison button, which is a little bit of a different design to everything else and does require a fair amount of force in order to trigger. Directly under that we have the two master mode switches for air to air and air to ground mode. As you can see, these are backlit and the backlighting does associate with the activations inside of DCS. It is synchronized, which is fantastic. Directly under that we have the master arm, which is a three-way toggle, despite the Hornet's master arm only having two. That has been included for aircraft that do have a central mode. The F-14 Tomcat comes to mind. Now across the bottom here we have dispenser bypass switches, and we have the ECM control. So we'll leave that one on standby. Jumping across to the right hand side of the cockpit we have the radar mode switch. Now this one's actually kind of interesting in how it functions. It is a 5-way switch. You go to 3, and then in order to go to emergency mode, position 4 actually pulls the switch up and 5 will turn through. So otherwise it'll operate like a 5-way in any other aircraft. And we have the INS switch. So this is probably going to set off some alarms here. But as you can see, this is an 8-way rotary. Directly across the top of the panel we have 3-way switches for the forward look infrared, the LTDR and the laser spot tracker. Alright, back to the central console, and we have on the right hand side our heading switches for the autopilot, CRS, and our alt switches to flick between barometric and radar. It's also worth adding at this point, I almost forgot it down here, we have the on and off switch for the RWR. We will be bringing this one here up in just a moment though. On the right hand side of the unit we have comms 1 and comms 2. At the moment I have these tuned in to go through the radio channels and of course push to activate. These can also be reset inside of the software to run as genuine axes. And then of course we have our 5 push buttons to go through station selection. Now the station selection switches are the biggest giveaway that WINWING wants you to buy both of these panels, because the functionality for these switches doesn't work particularly well unless you have access to the select jettison knob, which is on the takeoff panel and not the combat ready panel. I'll go over the layout of these a little bit more, but first let's progress down to the takeoff panel. Alright, so next off, the takeoff panel, bottom one here. We'll start off with gear lever as it is the most noticeable, and on activation it lights up red and it synchronizes with the cockpit of the F-18. We'll put that one up because we are in flight here at the moment. And on the opposing side we have the hook switch, same thing, down and up. Now these both operate as 3-way switches. They're quite sturdy and stiff, especially when considered against the standard 3-way switches that you find all over the panels. I think they might be slightly heavier duty due to the leverage applied by the gear and hook covers here. So next up on the outside we have 2 genuine axes that can also be toggled into 3-way switches inside of the WINWING software. Now in the F-18 at the moment I'm just using these as comms volume controls. These I've actually found to be really useful. There's always a shortage of axes on controllers, particularly if you happen to fly World War II aircraft or civilian aircraft in something like Microsoft Flight Simulator or IL-2. While these aren't particularly useful inside of the Hornet in DCS, in IL-2 I've found these incredibly valuable for radiator and fuel mixture controls in various aircraft. There's never enough axes around, and these are pretty good for that. Exactly the same thing in Microsoft Flight Simulator. So from there we jump down to the rest of the switches. So we've got the hook bypass for field, landing light, and launch bar, exactly as you would expect them. We've got the anti-skid as well. These are all 2-ways. Now, the 3-way switch here for flaps actually has a spade handle on it, which makes it a little bit easier to identify. Again, it just flicks through the motions. And then we have the missing select jettison wheel from the panel. Now, this one here is made of a slightly different plastic than you find on the rest. It actually feels a little bit odd and almost a little bit out of place. I assume the specific shape required some slight materials changes for this particular button, and the actual jettison section on the front here, it's just printed on. Now, directly underneath we have the park brake. Now, this is actually an interesting one because this one is actually a fully functional mini stick that can also be converted into a 4-way with push, which is what I've got it set to at the moment to function in the Hornet. So it works exactly as you would expect it to. I'm not sure why they chose to put a mini stick here. I'm not sure what usage that would have on any other aircraft outside of the Hornet, and it's an odd choice for what could be done with a simple 4-way, but it works well enough, so it is what it is. Down here we have the wing fold, which this is going to set off some alarms in the aircraft. Push to release, and then we can fold it back up, and then fold it back down and push in. So it functions basically like the actual handle does, just with a push rather than a pull, and works well. There is a couple of issues with this knob. It might come through there. There's a little bit of looseness about it that, while I don't think it's going to cause any issues in the short term, in the long term with a lot of usage, this could wear on where it actually joins to the switch mechanism underneath and have the knob actually release and fall off. I'm not sure what can be done about that, but it is a fairly low use area, so just something to keep in mind. And then last of all, we come down here to the panel backlight knob. Now this one's interesting because bound up correctly, not only does this control the backlighting inside of the aircraft, but it also controls the backlighting for the panels simultaneously. And more than that, if you have other WINWING hardware in your collection, and I'm going to actually rotate the camera through here a little bit, you'll get a little bit of a sneak preview of what I'll be reviewing later on in the week. That is the Orion HOTAS from WINWING as well. It's the second part that was sent through. If I adjust the brightness dial here, you'll see it adjusts everything across the entire range. So if you have... This is one of the big things that's going to have to be considered when you look at these panels. If you're planning on building something that's built around WINWING hardware, a sim pit, for example, that's built around WINWING hardware, they all seem to integrate with one another. However, it is worth noting that the synchronization that you've just seen only works in DCS, as that's what these panels were designed for, at least at the moment. If you want to use these panels in a sim outside of DCS, you essentially have two options in regards to the panel backlighting. The first option is to preset the panel backlighting to whatever you want in software and leave it. It will just sit at that level and it'll never change. Alternatively, there is an option in software for you to be able to bind the brightness of both the takeoff and combat panels, along with any other WINWING hardware you happen to have, to an axis on one of the controllers. So, for example, the panel backlighting axis on the takeoff panel. This will allow you to control the backlighting of the panels with hardware, and there is nothing stopping you from binding that same axis to the internal lighting of whatever aircraft in whatever sim you happen to be flying. However, they won't automatically synchronize. You'll need to manually synchronize both the physical lighting knob and the virtual lighting knob at the start of every flight. It's a bit fiddly, but at least it works. Unfortunately, the backlighting on the air-ground master modes and the station select switches doesn't have the same option. Your options there are essentially either synchronized with DCS, or you have a choice in the software to have the backlighting permanently on or permanently off behind those switches. This is unfortunate. I would like to see an update to the software that allows you to bind that backlighting to one of the switches directly, so you can have it manually toggle and then manually synchronize it into other sims if you wish to use it. But currently, as it stands, that's your options with it. You can have the lights on or off if you're playing outside of DCS, or you can synchronize when you're inside of DCS. So that brings us to the layout of the panels. Overall, the general layout is a little more cluttered than most switch panels that I've seen on the market, but that does mean more controls for the cost, which we'll get to in a moment. That said, it's still okay. It took a few flights, but I'm fully able to navigate around the panels in VR without seeing them. In fact, most of the VR videos you've seen over the last 3 weeks, I've been using these panels. Though the panels themselves would benefit from having some more unique switch ends, such as T-caps, to make various switches a little bit more identifiable by touch. Now, the select jettison switch is really my only major irritation with the whole layout of the combat panel. The station selection switches and the select jettison knob are kind of a pair, and while it is true that in the Hornet the select jettison switch does sit down by the other takeoff controls, as you've seen, the panels are a grab bag of functionality from across the cockpit. If I could make any changes to the layout, I would switch the INS mode switches, which are generally only used out of combat, with the select jettison switch between the two panels. In addition to that, and this is not actually a complaint, it's just something I would have liked to have seen, I also wouldn't have minded more than just the RWR power switch on the combat panel. Having ready access to the other RWR mode switches would have been really useful. So that brings us to the question of price. WINWING is selling these panels for $149 each before shipping, so call it $300 even for the set. This is on price par to other panel manufacturers such as Black Hog switch panels, and it undercuts some others, so overall for the quality and functionality I think the price is pretty good, with the caveat that some of that functionality is split across both panels, so you'll probably want to buy both of them as a set. So the major things to consider with these panels I think is first, are you looking to build a cockpit that is a, let's call it a semi-replica of an F-18, because that's basically what we're going for here, and is that functionality going to cross into the aircraft that you like to fly in your sims? And really the second question that I think needs to be brought up is whether or not you are interested in running WINWING hardware elsewhere inside of your setup, because the cross-compatibility here with the lighting controls is actually a really nice feature for sim pit builders, but it only does work with other WINWING hardware, so you'd need to put that into consideration. Otherwise, the construction materials here are nice and good. The panels are basically made out of metal all over with hard industrial plastic making up the fascias, and the switch quality is pretty great across the board. I have no complaints about any of it there. So overall, I'll give this one a recommended. Couple of things that I don't like, but overall, pretty good set of switch panels. Anyways guys, hope you enjoyed the video, hope you have found it informative. Thank you very much for watching, hope you have a great day. Now bugger off.